Hello, everybody. Mark Blumhardt here, founder and CEO of Boulder & Co. Creative Studios, and answering a question today, which is probably going to be one of the most difficult questions that I'm going to try to answer. It's, what courses do I take in order to become a creative director? Now, there's a lot of conversation out there right now about on Hustle Grid about how to become a creative director, and this is a really vital question. I don't want to leave it ignored. So let me back up for a second and tell you a little bit about myself. I might have had, 24 years of schooling. I've got 4 degrees. I've got a BFA, so Bachelor of Fine Arts. I was in industrial design and sculpture. I've got an MBA in corporate finance. I've got an MBA in leadership, and I've got a PhD in leadership, branding leadership. So to say that, I've taken a lot of courses, courses, folks. And when you're talking about a creative director, I think one of the most important things that you can have is a strong philosophy base with writing. That means you're able to express yourself on paper. It all happens on paper. You've got to be able to express yourself on paper extremely clearly. All right? So you've got to be able to be concise, authoritative, conversational, direct, but non-confrontational, on and on and on. Most of my day is actually spent writing, believe it or not. And so I would take a lot of writing classes, and the reason you got to take a lot of writing classes is because you got some teachers, they'll teach you how to write well, some, like on and on. The other thing I would like to say is live courses. When I look back on my life, if I don't have knowledge that I've read from a static book, most of this knowledge that's really affected me has come from live courses. I took when I first started off, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I went to architecture at Ohio State University. And there were 2 courses that absolutely changed my life. One of them was, there was this professor, and she would talk about just the structure and the philosophy of a building. And I think about this a lot. That was probably 30 years ago. And I think about it, and it has affected me, and it's helped me articulate my ideas and sell and pitch my ideas to clients, like maybe hundreds of clients. I've talked about it. There was another guy, I can't remember his name, is like Muhammad or something like that. He was at OSU. And he talked about space being the most precious medium of architecture. And nobody really thinks about that. So if you think about music, sound is a medium for music, and space is a medium for architecture. And if you think about that, where are you going to get those kind of philosophies? You've got to have this strong theoretical foundation, maybe academic foundation on which to build your career upon. Where are you going to get that kind of information from? Now, you might be able to get that information here and there and everything, but these little nuggets, they're like you just get here and there and pretty much everywhere. I was working in a furniture class, and with my personality and stuff, I probably had 5 or 6 pieces of furniture that I thought were going to revolutionize the world. I'm working on them. I'm excited about them. And my professor, his name is Joel Gunlock. He comes down, and I'm cutting on his board, and he comes, I'm cutting at this table, and he comes to me and said, "Hey, Mark, what are you doing?" He's like, "Oh, I've got this idea." I'm like, "I gotta ferret this out. I gotta work on this. I gotta do this. I gotta do this. I gotta do this." And I'm like, this is such a great idea. He just sat there quietly and he listened to me. And he said something that changed my life. He said, "Mark," he had this deep voice. He's just the nicest guy ever, right? He had this deep voice. He said, "Mark, nobody cares about the projects you start. They just care about the projects you finish." And my life literally at that moment changed. And so when you say, "Oh, college doesn't matter," and like it really doesn't, like, what would I give to have that experience? So anybody around me, I think I'm a good entrepreneur because I've got these ideas. But then for the most part, I put my head down and I'm a pit bull, and I just stay on those ideas until either I figure out they're going to work or they're not going to work. And that's pretty unique for an entrepreneur. Maybe not for an entrepreneur, I should say, maybe for a creative person. An entrepreneur should be like that. But if I hadn't had that conversation with him and it was embarrassing and I'm like, "Yeah, you're right," if I hadn't had that with him, then I wouldn't be that way. I'd still be doing a bunch of little projects that are unfinished, that are sitting in my basement, and everybody's just rolling their eyes. So if anybody knows Joel Gunlock or Joel Gunlock is listening, thank you very much, sir. Really appreciate it. The other thing, too, is that let's say you're in class and I take another class. I can't remember her name. She didn't even give me credit for her class. It was probably one of the best classes I've ever taken. It was about modern art. That changed my life. And I went to art school, and I think I was a senior, and I took this class called Modern Art. And we're in this class, and it was kind of like this auditorium, and this professor, she was kind of, she was really passionate about it, and she was very knowledgeable about art and art history. And I thought I was a great student, and a lot of my learning experiences actually has this element of embarrassment, if you haven't picked up already, right? So I was kind of embarrassed when Joel Gunlock talked to me about starting all these projects and never finishing them. I was really embarrassed. And so I was sitting in this class, and it was the first class, and it was like a 3-hour class, and we're talking about modern art, and the lady said, "What is modern art?" And, nobody really answered, and there was a couple people, and, I thought I was, here I'm a senior, and, BFA, and, kind of knew art. So I raised my hand. I said, well, it's taking all the masters and the classics and kind of building upon that, and with your own, your own style. And she's like, no, it's exactly the opposite. And I was kind of embarrassed because, I'm like looking around. I'm like, don't you guys know what modern art is, And modern art for her was just this expression of your own. It's your own soul. And so it doesn't have to really do anything about the classics. Leave the classics, let the classics be the classics, right? We don't need to have another parable on a stained glass window or something like that. Those are great. If you want to do that, it's fine. But modern art really is an expression of your soul. To say, you know what? I was here. I walked on this planet. And even though, I was here. There's this cry that's in somebody's soul. It's like, I was here. I mattered. And this is what I gave the world. And that's modern art. I just had this conversation with my son. I had a son, his name's Jackson. And he was kind of like, he goes, Dad, why did you name me Jackson? So it's a little bit of a tangent, right? But this is the effect that school and a great professor should have on you. I named my son after Jackson Pollock. But not Jackson Pollock as you imagine Jackson Pollock as the painter. Everybody kind of knows Jackson Pollock. In fact, a couple of years ago, Jackson Pollock's print and paintings were the most expensive paintings you could find in the world, right? So I did name him after Jackson Pollock, but it wasn't after him or the painting, but the spirit of which he lived in. Now, this is the way I remember the story of Jackson Pollock, and I refuse to find out if it's actually accurate, right? So when I'm sitting in this class about modern art, she talked about Jackson Pollock, and art just went through this transformation. And it was before it was if you were super wealthy, you could hire a well-known artist, and that person would spend 6 months painting your 10-year-old kid. Your 10-year-old kid would come in for a sitting, and you'd paint the kid, and it would take about 6 months, and everybody would be like, oh, this is great. And you put up on a wall, and everybody look at it and be there, timeless. All of a sudden, cameras came around. Everybody could have a camera with one snap of a shot. Back then, it was black and white, but you got exact image of that person. So what about painting? What happened? What was the point of painting? If you don't, these deep questions, if you're not in school, and if you're not in a class with a professor that has intensity, that has spirit, that appreciates this stuff, not just going through the motion in another course, they're asking you stuff, it starts these questions. Right? You start thinking at a different level, folks. What is the point of art? And you can be like, what's the point of art? And what's business? But you know what? They're related. It's a way you think. This critical thinking is transferable, right? The way you think about art transfers to your business. So you think about that, right? So you could just go, somebody could just go and say, hold on, click, and they've got a perfect representation of that kid that would have taken that master, let's say Michelangelo or whomever, 6 months to paint. Click. Okay. So what about art? What happened with art? And that turned into the glorious stage or a glorious era of Impressionism. People said, well, what if art was more of an impression of what was happening, right? So I walk along this beach and the sunlight hitting it and the feeling, and can we capture that on camera? Because if you look at the camera's kind of static. It doesn't have that vibrancy, that art and the texture and the depth of the art and the intensity and kind of the what do you call it? The exaggerated expression of that paint, the palette. And how do you put it on? Do you always use a brush or do you use a palette knife? Completely two different looks. So what about that? So they started trying to capture that moment. And then there was this guy, his name is Jackson Pollock. And he lived, this is the way I remember it, okay, folks? So he was a pretty big family. His mother was from New York City. And they lived in Nebraska. I think it was Nebraska or somewhere, right? And she loved loved the city. She loved the art scene, and she didn't want to be a farmer and blah, blah, blah. And so she raised all her kids saying, hey, you're going to be an artist, and planted the seed in. And it was kind of deep, right? That's how they were born and raised. Well, Jackson Pollock, he listened to this. He listened to New York. He listened to all that stuff, and this is kind of what he wanted. That was his light in life. And so he went to art school, but before he went to art school, his older brother went to art school. His older brother, I don't even know his name, which is so amazing, in the context of what I'm saying. I don't even know who he was. So he went to art school, and he became literally a little bit famous. Well, he became famous, right? And he draw these scenes from Nebraska, like these rolling hills and, the farms and the barns and, on and on and on. And he was kind of heralded. I mean, it was kind of different in New York City, and they were like, oh, this is kind of cool. They're in the city, and they could buy something from some kid that came from Nebraska, great story and everything else like that. Then Jackson Pollock comes along. He wasn't really that great, right? A lot of these great artists are great artists. You can't really say that about him. He tried to follow in the same footsteps of his brother, and, it just wasn't working out. But there was this cry saying, I want to do this. I want to do this really, 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 really bad. And so he became an alcoholic and, on and on and on. It was just kind of a miserable wreck of a person. But one day as he's sitting there just completely beat up by life, he's tried to do this, farming stuff and, it just wasn't working out, on and on. It was just, this poor guy just couldn't, he just didn't have it. So here Jackson Pollock, he's trying to do what his brother's doing, this kind of farm, and he's not getting it, right? Nobody's looking at him, it's not clicking everything. And so he's sitting there in the studio late night one night, just completely drunk and just kind of miserable and digging deep. He's like, man, and he takes his brush and he just throws it against the canvas, and it's like splashes against the canvas. He's like, whoa, kind of like that. Ragey throws another one. Pretty soon Jackson Pollock comes out. So it's not about Jackson Pollock, it's not about the paintings, but it's the spirit of the soul of a man, or I shouldn't say a man, of a person that screams out, says, I was here. I walked on this planet. I was here. I matter. And that's something that's so precious. So when I look at that has deeply affected me. I named my kid after that spirit, like the spirit of a person that says, you matter and you were here. And so when I'm working in business, that really affects me, that people matter. That helps me respect them. That you matter. You're a person. You've got an opinion. Yeah, sometimes you're really negative. Sometimes you're blah, blah, blah. But you are a person. You're here. And I respect that light in you. I respect you as a person. And I want to find out exactly what's inside of you, how you were made, and what precious gift you can give our organization and the world. Sounds crazy? I don't think it is. Because I believe absolutely everybody's an individual. And everybody's got their own light. And everybody's got this cry to be heard. This cry of Jackson Pollock. And I think that his paintings were so expensive because he kind of took that and bottled that spirit up and put it on a canvas. I matter. I was here. Listen to me, please, please. And you can take that. And I wouldn't have had that if I wasn't sitting in that class. And so many other classes are the same way, right? I remember composition class, they would give us this, let's say, I can't remember what it was. Let's say an 8.5 by 11 paper. And then they gave us 3 blocks. One was completely square, one was long rectangular, one was a little bit, another rectangular, but a little bit more squat. And so we had like literally, I think 2 weeks to put these on paper in a really good way. I'm like, seriously, try it. And then you put it in and you're like, boom, there it is. And you're like, but is it? And then you fudge it and you move it and you move it and you move it and you move it. And then all of a sudden you take these, you've got a class of 30 students that have been working on one big paper with 3 little, images on it. And you put them against the wall. Let's all 30 of them. And you talk about it. And you realize that they're all not all created equal. That there's these relationships in space between the two. And it becomes really, really clear. Like, oh my goodness, that's amazing. Like just those 3 images. And I think about that all the time. You can ask my team, I think about it all the time. You got a dominant image, subdominant, and subordinate image. And I talk about this all the time. And this goes back from my freshman year at Columbus College of Art and Design. And during that time, actually, if you guys know Columbus College of Art and Design, Joseph Kanzani came and that was the last class that he critiqued. This guy is a monster in art, he like anybody who knows Columbus art scene knows Joseph Kanzani. So he took that, he just realized that there's differences, there's subtleties, very, very subtle subtleties. And the devil's in the details. And you start appreciating it. It's kind of like Steve Jobs. The most influential class he ever had in his life had nothing to do with technology, had nothing to do with coding, had nothing to do with manufacturing, operations, human resources, or anything else like that. It was calligraphy. He took a class. I would love to have sat in that class. He took a class and he did calligraphy. Hours and hours and hours of calligraphy. It's the process. It's the intention. It's the purpose. It's the sophistication. It's the nuances. It's the motion. It's the train of thought. It's the meditation. All of it. That was the most important class he'd ever taken in his life. And he took it for free. So what classes are you taking and how can you sit there and say, these moments have really impacted me for the good? Now, everybody can talk about like, oh yeah, well, when I was like blah, 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 somebody, touched me inappropriately, blah, 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 whatever. That's negative, right? But positive. Can you sit there in a camera and say, these were unbelievably positive influences on my life that changed my life forever, just like Steve Jobs. And if you know anything about Steve Jobs, he talks about that class a lot. Some teacher had that effect on Steve Jobs. He probably didn't even know it. So what classes to take? It's actually kind of simple. Take the classes that affect you for your life. And to be honest with you, I maybe wouldn't look so much at the subject matter. I'd look at the professor who's delivering it. Because I've heard professors going, yeah, and you're just like, just barely staying alive. You're wasting your time, you're wasting your money, and my goodness, the school's wasting their salary. I mean, come on, seriously, get that guy out of here. Replace him with somebody who's passionate and lives a life that's just on the edge and pushing all the time. And those are classes I would take, folks. I think that colleges should have almost like a Yelp rating. So the professors, you can look in as a freshman and be like, I want to take this class, this class, this class, this class. Because when I go out, I go to, let's say I go to a city I've never been to. Guess what? The first things I do, I pull up Yelp to find out what great restaurants, 5-star reviewed restaurants in that area. I'm going there. I don't care if it's crepes. I don't care if it's ribs. I don't care what it is. I'm going there. So, I think that, you should look at your professors. And Rate My Professor doesn't really count. I'm on Rate My Professor. But when you look at Rate My Professor, I don't think those ratings really matter. Because they're like, how hard was the professor? How easy was the professor? I'm like, what does that mean? So that doesn't really work. But find the professors that are making a difference in whatever they're doing. Take their class and let their class have an impact on your life. Thank you.